The year is nil, and the world looks like this. Well, the civilized world anyway, which at this point was located primarily on the continent of Nordenheim. That being said, it is worth mentioning that human sources have a tendency to portray other races as savage beasts, and most of the sources that have survived to the present day are very human. Today, however, we will not be focusing on the exploits of mankind, but will instead be tackling the tricky topic of the Dralian Empire in the early 1st century. As you will already know, the Empire had recently been humiliated by those pesky humans, with a large-scale revolt against Dralian rule on the continent, eventually prompting an intervention from neighbouring human kingdoms. But the birth of the Confederation of Mankind is a story for another time. Suffice it to say that the Dralian Empire had just been kicked off the continent, experiencing its first territorial retreat in its history. The Empire would need to react forcefully if it was to endure, and already Dralian commanders and aristocrats were speculating on what new conquests would best fill the hole left by their lost continental lands. The speculation would only be ended with the ascension of two new Diarchs in 5 AU, Diarch Mor and Diarch Garth, who would lead their forces on new campaigns to recapture the Empire's honour and perhaps some lost territory. The Dralian Empire was a diarchy, and always had been, with nobles choosing two candidates from among their number to rule together, the idea being that two rulers could wage multiple wars at once, and should one die, then the survivor would be elevated to Primarch of Dralia, until new Diarchs could be chosen. Diarch Gareth planned to march south to crush the Kingdom of Alba, and potentially regain a foothold on the continent. Diarch Mor, on the other hand, sought to expand the empire to Skorabos, hoping to bring down the relatively weak realm of Atodon to the west. Both Diarchs were skilled generals, with years of experience, the loyalty of their troops, and formidable armies. What could possibly go wrong? Well, for a start, Diarch Mor could die mysteriously along with his entire army in 7 AU, and confusingly along with the entire Atafolk army. Atodon is notorious for having a messy history, and thousands of warriors on both sides simply vanishing, with only charred grass and bones being left on the battlefield, is just one example of that. The catastrophic loss of men, material and leadership was a great blow to the Empire. Luckily, however, now Primarch Gareth's campaigns in the south had been a success, with the conquest of Alba being swift, and the Primarch even reasserting Dralian rule on the continent. And thanks to Gareth, the diarchy would be re-established once his term of office ended, and stability would reign. Except Gareth had other ideas. He returned to Dralia as the victorious conqueror in 10 AU, and spent the next year or so purging all political opposition, restricting the rights of his subjects, and generally enforcing a dictatorial regime while he built an even grander army. Not all were happy with this, but Gareth was popular due to his victories, and the only check on his power had died in Atodon. Historians debate the significance of these actions, but most agree that it set a new precedent in Dralian politics. For the first time in Dralian history, if you disagreed with someone, it became acceptable to have them killed. However, by 12 AU, Gareth was done killing his fellow Dralians, and in a bid to bolster his support, decided to avenge Diarch Mor by conquering Atodon. It is much clearer what happened in the second invasion than the first, but the result was much the same. Primarch Gareth died in the Battle of Skeletor Bay, shortly after his forces landed on the shores of Atodon. In the 5 or so years since the last invasion, a new power had filled the vacuum created after the death of much of Atodon's nobility in 7 AU. Another example of Atodon's messy history, the Daunted Khan had managed to forge an empire of sorts in a very short space of time, and with his army he threw the Dralian forces back into the sea, before crowning himself the first king of Atadon. The Darted Khan, or Darnades as he was known in Atadon, is a complicated figure, to cover on another day, but importantly, thanks to him, the Dralians had been defeated again in Atadon, and the Empire had no leadership whatsoever. So, how would Dralia react to being leaderless? Well, elect 2 new Diarchs, of course. No? Oh. Apparently the answer was enter into a 6-year-long civil war, with every general with more than a few years of experience declaring themselves the new Primarch. Not Diarch, Primarch. That was the impact of Gareth. He came along, made himself an autocrat, then killed everyone opposed to autocracy and got himself killed. So, as I said, 6 years of brutal civil war. Luckily for Dralia, outsiders didn't understand what was going on, so no foreign powers took advantage of the chaos. By 20 AU, however, Dralia had a new Primarch, Primarch Louis. But then Louis decides he'd rather just be called Emperor Louis, and that's how Dralia got its first emperor. Emperor Louis had a long reign of about 4 years before he was assassinated in a palace coup by General Forthan, now Emperor Forthan. Emperor Forthan doesn't do too badly actually, as when he sees the Confederation of Mankind in its own bloody civil war, he decides to take advantage by expanding the Empire's holdings upon the continent in 27 AU. In 32 AU, Forthan decides to try conquering lands in Scorobos, though he chooses to avoid Atadon, instead focusing on lands north of the Scarix Mountains. And believe it or not, he doesn't die. Not till 36 AU, when he dies peacefully in his sleep, aged 63. Due to his great success and popularity, his son, Gawes, succeeds him as emperor, marking the first peaceful transition of power since the dissolution of the Diarchy. Gawes is assassinated that same year. Another civil war breaks out, though this one is shorter and less bloody, with Dorfath defeating Elagnath to become emperor in 39 AU. The new Emperor Dorfath takes a page or two out of Gareth's book, deciding to purge all his political opponents in 40 AU, and in 43 AU decides to try to conquer Atadon. Oddly enough, he survives this campaign, despite being soundly defeated by the armies of Queen Acelia, and returns to Dralia in disgrace. Then something happens that nobody saw coming. He gets assassinated in 44 AU. On the bright side, no civil war erupts this time though, and a general named Dafydd, who fought with Forthan, is chosen by the aristocracy to be the next emperor. And to his credit, he does not end up assassinated. So, what can we really say about the Dralian Empire in the early 1st century? Maybe introducing violence to politics begets more violence? Maybe giving power to individuals with autocratic ambitions is risky? Maybe any ruler seeking to have a successful reign ought to stay the hell out of Atadon? Maybe. Regardless, if you have anything to add, or feel I've relied too heavily upon human historiographies, I'd be happy to hear from you. But until next time, don't assassinate your rivals, kids.